It was a cold, crisp morning when the storm came. In the dense woods, far from human eyes, a German shepherd named Elsa and her 3 newly born puppies lay huddled together, their fur trembling in the bitter cold. Elsa's body shielded them as best as she could, but the chill of the night was unforgiving. She had been chained to the rough bark of a tree, her leash tight around the trunk, the heavy metal links cutting into her fur. Her heart ached with the helplessness of the situation. She was alone, bound in an unfamiliar place, with no way of knowing what had happened to the humans who had once cared for her. For days, she had been here, isolated, her only company the soft whimpering of her pups. Elsa had tried everything to free herself, pawing at the chains, barking desperately into the wind, even trying to chew through the thick rope. But no matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. The humans had left her here, abandoned in the wilderness, with no reason or mercy. But Elsa's spirit was not one to give up easily. A deep, instinctual strength lay within her, a force greater than her circumstances. She had been trained to serve, to protect, to love and care, and now, with the weight of her puppies' lives depending on her, she would find a way to survive. The first night was the hardest. Snow began to fall, thin, icy flakes that grew heavier with each passing hour. The cold was unbearable, but Elsa kept her puppies close, warming them with her body. She licked their tiny faces, trying to reassure them, her heart heavy with worry. The storm grew fiercer, the wind howling through the trees, shaking the branches with violent gusts. Elsa's body trembled from exhaustion, but her will to survive never wavered. She would protect her pups at any cost. As the days dragged on, Elsa's situation grew more desperate. The food she had been given by her humans ran out quickly, and there was no way to fetch more. But Elsa's sharp instincts had been honed for years, and she quickly learned how to forage for berries, roots, and small creatures that dared wander close. She ate sparingly, knowing that her body was not only feeding herself but her pups as well. However, one cold morning, the wind shifted, and Elsa heard something strange. A low, ominous growl in the distance. Her ears perked up, and her muscles tensed. Wolves. She had heard their calls before, but never so close, never so near. Elsa knew the wolves were the rulers of this forest. They were fierce, cunning, and relentless. They could be a threat to her, especially now in her weakened state. But Elsa had always been a fighter, and her instinct for survival kicked in. She would not let her pups fall prey to these wild creatures, not without a fight. As the growl grew louder, Elsa's eyes darted around, searching for the source of the sound. The wolves were getting closer. Elsa's heart raced in her chest, but she didn't back down. Her mind raced. How would she protect her pups? How would she keep them safe? She needed to act fast. In the distance, she saw movement, shadows flitting between the trees. Elsa's body went rigid. She could see the glint of eyes in the darkness. The wolves had arrived. Elsa's first instinct was to protect her pups. She positioned herself between the growling shadows and her puppies, her body tense, ready to spring into action. The wind howled again, and the snow began to fall heavier, turning the forest into a swirling white blur. The wolves circled around her, their growls low and menacing, but Elsa's eyes never left them. Her tail flicked nervously, but Elsa was resolute. She would not be intimidated. With every breath she took, the air seemed colder, sharper, but she remained steadfast. She would protect her pups, no matter what. The wolves were getting closer now, their breaths visible in the cold air. Elsa's instincts were on high alert. She could smell the musk of the pack, strong, wild, and untamed. But there was something else, something curious in their eyes. They weren't attacking. Not yet. One of the wolves, a large gray one with piercing blue eyes, stepped forward, sizing Elsa up. He sniffed the air, and Elsa stood tall, her ears erect. The wolf's growl softened, and he took another cautious step closer. For a moment, Elsa locked eyes with the wolf, their gazes meeting with an intensity that could only be described as a silent communication. She wasn't just any dog. She was a mother, a protector. And though she was chained, Though she was weakened by the elements, her resolve was unshakable. She was a force to be reckoned with. The pack stood still, the tension palpable. Elsa could feel the weight of the moment. The wolves were sizing her up, determining whether she was a threat or something else. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Elsa made a decision. She would not show fear. She would not let them see her as prey. Then something remarkable happened. The wolf with the piercing blue eyes took another step forward. His growl replaced by a soft, almost hesitant sound, a bark of sorts, low and rumbling. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. And Elsa, with all the strength of a mother's love and a survivor's instinct, knew exactly what that invitation meant. The air was thick with tension, and Elsa stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the wolf with the piercing blue eyes took another step forward. The moment hung in the balance. Would they attack? Would they see her as prey or perhaps as something else? The snow continued to fall heavily, swirling around the trees, but Elsa's focus never wavered. She had no choice but to act cautiously. Her protective instincts flared up, and she took a small, deliberate step back, keeping her pups close behind her, sheltered in the snow. Her mind raced. Wolves were dangerous, but she had always been clever. She had survived so much already. She wasn't about to let her pups fall into the jaws of a wild animal without a fight. But then, the unexpected happened. The gray wolf with the intense blue eyes, his fur thick and matted from the winter cold, lowered his head slightly and let out a low whine. It wasn't a growl or a snarl. It was a sound of curiosity, an acknowledgement of Elsa's bravery. And with that, something shifted between them. Elsa's instincts told her to be cautious, but something in the wolf's demeanor made her pause. He didn't appear threatening anymore. His body language was not aggressive. He wasn't showing his teeth, and his tail wasn't raised in hostility. It was a strange, almost gentle gesture. The pack behind him seemed to mirror his hesitation, watching Elsa closely but waiting for her response. Elsa's eyes never left the wolf, her muscles taut and her senses on high alert. But as her gaze softened, she sensed something deeper within him. A shared understanding, a common struggle for survival. This was no ordinary wolf. This wolf was a leader, the alpha, and there was something about him that reminded her of her own resolve to protect her pups, to survive at any cost. Slowly, Elsa began to lower herself to the ground. Her body relaxed, but her guard still intact. She wasn't surrendering. She was simply signaling that she wasn't a threat. Her tail, stiff at first, slowly began to lower, a sign of respect and submission, but not weakness. It was a careful dance, one that would determine whether she would be accepted into their world or pushed away. The alpha wolf took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. He sniffed the air around her, his gaze flicking briefly to her pups, then back to Elsa. There was a brief, tense moment where it seemed like the whole forest had paused. Elsa's heart was in her throat, but she remained calm, focused. She would not let fear show. She would do whatever it took to protect her family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the alpha wolf turned his head and gave a low, almost imperceptible whine, a sound that carried through the silence of the snowy woods. And with that, he stepped back. The other wolves in the pack followed suit. One by one, they shifted, their growls quieting, their postures relaxing. They weren't a threat, not anymore. They were curious, cautious but curious. Elsa's breath, which she hadn't even realized she was holding, escaped in a slow, steady exhale. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her eyes softened. The danger had passed for now. She was no longer the prey. Somehow, she had become something else, an enigma to these wild creatures. The alpha looked back at Elsa, his eyes locking onto hers one last time. Then, without a word, he turned and began to move deeper into the forest, his pack following closely behind. They weren't leaving, not yet, but they weren't attacking either. They had accepted her presence for now. Elsa's mind raced as she watched the wolves disappear into the shadows of the trees. She felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. What had just happened? Had she earned their trust? Was this her chance to survive, to thrive, to protect her pups in this harsh, unforgiving land? But Elsa had always known how to adapt. She had no choice but to trust her instincts, just as she had done when she first found herself chained to that tree. And right now, those instincts told her that these wolves were not enemies. They were survivors just like her. As the pack faded into the distance, Elsa felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. She wasn't alone anymore. There was a chance, a slim chance but a chance nonetheless, that she could find her place in this wild world beside these wolves. She would learn from them, adapt to their ways, and perhaps, in time, they would come to accept her as one of their own. But she couldn't afford to be complacent. She still had her pups to protect. They were her responsibility, and she would fight tooth and nail to keep them safe. With a deep breath, Elsa turned and padded carefully back to her pups. They were huddled together, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold. Elsa lay down beside them, curling her body protectively around them, her fur acting as a shield against the biting wind. She knew that this was only the beginning. The wilderness was full of dangers, blizzards, floods, fires, and predators. But Elsa was no stranger to adversity. And if the wolves had shown her anything, it was that survival in this harsh land required more than strength. It required unity, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could forge that unity with the pack. As Elsa closed her eyes and listened to the howling wind, she couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. One thing was certain, she wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The days following the encounter with the wolves felt like a dream. A strange limbo where Elsa was both part of the wilderness and yet not fully immersed in it. The pack had not come back to her, but Elsa couldn't shake the feeling that they were out there, watching, waiting. Her instincts told her that the wolves were testing her in ways she could not yet understand. They had given her a chance, an invitation, but it was up to her to prove she was worthy of it. Elsa spent her days in the snowy forest, always vigilant, always alert. The wind was biting, the cold unbearable, but she pressed on. Her pups, though small, had begun to grow stronger each day. They were becoming more aware of their surroundings, their eyes opening, their bodies moving with more purpose. Elsa's love for them, her fierce loyalty, kept her going. Everything she did, every step she took, was for them. They needed her. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the stars began to twinkle through the thickening snow, Elsa heard it again. The unmistakable sound of wolves in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. They were close, very close. She lowered herself to the ground, her body instinctively shifting into a defensive posture as she shielded her pups behind her. Elsa's gaze searched the trees, her ears twitching at every rustle of the wind. The pack was here. But would they approach her again? Or was this the moment they would decide her fate? The wind carried their scent to her, strong, wild, and untamed. They were near, but still out of sight. Suddenly, from the shadows, the large alpha emerged, his blue eyes gleaming in the fading light. Elsa tensed, but this time, there was no growl, no threat in his posture. The alpha wolf was calm, steady. He stood still for a moment, observing Elsa, his head slightly tilted, as if contemplating something. Then, without a word, he began to move, his pack following behind him. They didn't encircle her as Elsa had feared. They moved with purpose, as though they had been waiting for this moment. Elsa took a deep breath and stood, her legs trembling slightly from the cold. Her heart was racing, but she refused to show fear. She couldn't, her pups were depending on her. The alpha wolf came closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Elsa felt a sense of déjà vu. This was the same wolf from before, the one who had made the first move, the one who had given her that silent invitation. The alpha stopped just within reach, and Elsa instinctively took a cautious step toward him. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready. Ready to prove her worth, to show the wolves that she wasn't just a dog, chained to a tree, struggling to survive. She was a mother, a survivor, and she could learn their ways if it meant ensuring the safety of her pups. The alpha's gaze softened as he watched Elsa approach. He didn't back away, nor did he growl. Instead, he gave a soft whine, a sound that echoed through the cold air, and then he did something unexpected. He lowered his head, exposing the back of his neck. It was a gesture of submission, but also an invitation. He was offering trust. Elsa's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea how to respond, but her instincts were strong. She stepped forward slowly, her movements calculated and careful. She reached out, her nose brushing the side of the alpha's neck. The moment was charged with something primal, an unspoken understanding that passed between them. The pack was watching, waiting. Elsa could feel their eyes on her, their silent judgment. But this time, there was no hostility. Instead, there was curiosity, respect even. The alpha raised his head and took a step back, looking at her with a new intensity in his eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and began to walk deeper into the forest. The pack followed in silence, but this time, they didn't disappear into the shadows. They waited for Elsa to join them. Elsa hesitated for a moment. Her pups were still behind her, nestled in the snow, but they were growing more independent, their tiny bodies moving more confidently now. Elsa glanced at them, her heart swelling with pride and love. She had to make a choice. She had to decide if this pack, these wolves, would be the key to their survival. With one last look at her pups, Elsa made up her mind. She wasn't just going to survive anymore. She was going to thrive. She had to learn from these wolves if she wanted to give her pups the life they deserved. Slowly, carefully, she followed the alpha's lead. The journey wasn't easy. As Elsa trotted beside the wolves, she felt the weight of her decision. She was no longer an outsider, no longer chained to a tree. She was free, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. The wolves were wild, untamed creatures, and their ways were different from anything Elsa had known. She had been trained to obey humans, to follow commands, but in the wild, there were no commands, only survival. In the following days, Elsa learned quickly. She watched the pack's every move, studied their behavior, and tried to imitate them. The alpha led the way, teaching Elsa the ways of the wild, how to hunt, how to track prey, how to read the signs of the forest. Elsa's sharp instincts guided her, and slowly, she began to feel herself blending into the pack. She was no longer just a dog. She was becoming one of them. But Elsa's heart never strayed too far from her pups. Every night, she would return to the small den she had made in the snow, where her pups slept soundly, their tiny bodies curled up for warmth. Elsa's love for them never wavered. She was determined to protect them no matter the cost. One evening, after a long hunt with the pack, Elsa returned to find her pups awake, playing together in the snow. She felt a rush of relief and joy, but it was quickly followed by the recognition that they were growing, adapting, and learning from their surroundings. She wasn't just raising them anymore. She was showing them how to survive in the wild, just as she had been taught by the wolves. But Elsa's journey was far from over. There were dangers ahead, blizzards, floods, and the threat of other predators. Elsa knew that the wolves would help her, but it was her courage, her loyalty, and her love for her pups that would see them through. The days grew colder, and Elsa felt the weight of the wilderness pressing in from every side. She had learned much from the wolves, but the forest was still a harsh, unforgiving place. The pack had taught her how to hunt, how to track prey, how to move through the trees without making a sound. But survival was more than just skills. It was about endurance, strength, and the will to overcome whatever challenges the wild threw at you. Elsa had already proven her loyalty to the pack, but now, she would prove her worth. One morning, after a night of heavy snow, the pack gathered at the edge of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of an approaching storm, something bigger than they had ever faced before. Elsa felt it too, the sharp bite of the wind, the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wolves' fur bristled as they looked toward the sky, and the alpha stepped forward, his blue eyes narrowing in concentration. The storm was coming. Elsa's heart sank. She knew what that meant. The storm would be powerful, blizzards that could bury them in snow, winds that could knock them off their feet. The wilderness was not kind during a storm. It was survival at its harshest. Without hesitation, the alpha gave a sharp bark, signaling the pack to move. Elsa followed quickly, her body tense, her mind racing. She had to think quickly. She needed to find shelter for herself and her pups. But the pack was already moving deeper into the forest, a place Elsa hadn't fully explored. There was no time to hesitate. The pack moved with purpose, their sharp eyes scanning the forest for any signs of danger or shelter. Elsa stayed close, her body low, her senses alert. The wind howled louder, and the first flakes of snow began to fall, swirling in the air like tiny shards of ice. The temperature plummeted, and Elsa's fur was soon covered in a layer of frost. But she kept moving. She had no choice. She had to find a safe place for her pups. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Elsa noticed the wolves' behavior changing. They were more alert, more cautious. The wind began to pick up, howling through the trees with an eerie force. The trees groaned under the pressure of the storm, their branches swaying dangerously. The pack came to a halt in front of a large cave, hidden behind a curtain of icicles. Elsa's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the shelter they had been searching for. The wolves crowded into the cave, their bodies shifting into place. Elsa followed them, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized that they had found safety for the moment. But as Elsa moved into the shelter, she noticed something was wrong. The alpha wolf's eyes narrowed as he stood in the entrance of the cave. His ears perked up. Something was out there, something dangerous. Elsa's instincts flared. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Fast, silent, and deadly. It was a pack of wild dogs, hungry and desperate. They were circling the cave, their eyes filled with malice. Elsa's blood ran cold. The wild dogs were known for their ruthless attacks. They had no pack, no sense of loyalty. They only wanted to survive, and they would do whatever it took to claim the shelter the wolves had just found. Elsa's heart raced as the wild dogs grew bolder, inching closer to the entrance. The wolves growled low, but the wild dogs didn't retreat. They were closing in fast. Elsa knew what she had to do. She was the mother here, the protector. The wolves had accepted her into their pack. But now, it was her turn to prove herself. She couldn't allow these wild dogs to harm her pups, and she wouldn't let them take the shelter from the wolves either. Without thinking, Elsa darted to the entrance of the cave. She let out a loud, defiant bark, her body positioned between the wild dogs and her pack. The wild dogs hesitated for a moment, eyeing her cautiously, but they didn't back down. They had been starved by the storm and were willing to fight for what they needed. Elsa stood her ground, her body poised to strike. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. She couldn't let them come any closer. The wild dogs had no loyalty, no pack, but Elsa had something far more powerful. She had love and determination. And in that moment it was enough. The alpha wolf joined her at the entrance, his growl deep and threatening. He stood tall beside Elsa, his body bristling with readiness. The rest of the pack flanked them, their sharp teeth bared, their eyes fierce and unwavering. The wild dogs, seeing the strength and unity of the wolves, faltered. Elsa felt the tension in the air, the moment hanging heavy between the two groups. Neither side wanted to fight, but neither was willing to back down. And then, in a flash of movement, the alpha wolf lunged. The wild dogs scattered, retreating into the storm, their tails between their legs. The pack had won. Elsa had won. As the wild dogs disappeared into the snow, Elsa felt a surge of triumph. She had protected her pups, protected the pack. She had proven herself, not just as a survivor, but as a fierce and loyal protector. The pack moved deeper into the cave, where Elsa returned to her pups, her heart still racing from the encounter. She curled around them, her body warm against their cold, tiny bodies. The storm raged outside, but Elsa knew they were safe. For now. She had shown the pack that she was one of them, that she was ready to face whatever dangers the wild threw their way. And as the howling wind outside echoed through the cave, Elsa realized that this was her life now. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. She was part of the wild. And nothing, not even a storm or a pack of wild dogs, could take that away from her. The storm raged for days, and Elsa remained nestled in the warmth of the cave with her pups, her body curled protectively around them. The snow piled high outside, blanketing the forest in a thick, impenetrable white. Inside the cave, the wolves had settled into a silent rhythm. The pack had made their home here, sheltered from the worst of the elements. But Elsa knew that even this place was not entirely safe. The wild was unforgiving, and survival depended on staying vigilant. Despite the danger, Elsa found herself feeling an odd sense of peace. She had come a long way from the frightened dog chained to a tree. Here, in the heart of the wilderness, surrounded by the pack, she had found a new sense of belonging. Elsa had learned from the wolves, adapted to their ways, and in turn, they had accepted her, no longer just as a stranger, but as one of their own. Her pups had grown stronger in the warmth of the cave, their tiny bodies now fully able to explore the world around them. Elsa watched over them with a fierce, loving gaze, guiding them as they stumbled through the snow, teaching them how to listen to the wind and read the signs of the forest. The wolves never interfered, but their presence was a constant reminder that Elsa was no longer alone. She had found a new family, and she would do anything to protect it. One afternoon, after a few days of relative calm, the pack gathered outside the cave, their bodies tense as they prepared to venture deeper into the forest. Elsa joined them, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had learned a great deal about the forest in the past weeks, but the deeper areas remained a mystery, full of dangers she had yet to face. The alpha led the way, his fur bristling against the cold wind as his sharp eyes scanned the landscape. Elsa followed closely behind him, her body alert and ready. She had become more attuned to the pack's movements, more in tune with their instincts. The wolves were masters of the forest, and Elsa had learned to trust their judgment as if it were her own. As they ventured farther into the trees, Elsa's senses were on high alert. She could feel the change in the air, the subtle shift that only a survivor could recognize. The wolves seemed to sense it too, their bodies tense, their ears swiveling with each sound that echoed through the forest. Elsa's muscles rippled with readiness, her eyes darting around the trees, every nerve focused on the hunt. She could feel the pack's collective energy, a quiet, unspoken bond that tied them together. Then, without warning, the air grew thick with the scent of prey, a large herd of deer, grazing quietly in the distance. Elsa's heart raced. She had hunted before, but never on this scale. The wolves had taught her how to track, how to move quietly through the forest, but now, she was learning something else, the art of the hunt as a pack. The alpha signaled with a sharp, low growl, and Elsa's instincts kicked in. She could hear the rustle of the pack moving, feel the rhythm of their coordinated movements as they spread out, surrounding the herd from all sides. Elsa's body was moving before her mind could catch up, her paws pressing softly into the snow as she followed the others. It was then that Elsa felt it, the deep primal connection that existed between the wolves. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. The pack was a single, living entity, its strength derived from the unity of its members. Elsa was no longer just an outsider. She was part of that unity. In a flash of movement, the hunt began. The wolves surged forward, their bodies flowing in perfect synchrony, closing in on the deer. Elsa's heart pounded in her chest as she ran beside the alpha, her body moving in perfect rhythm with his. The deer scattered, but the pack was faster, more determined. Elsa could feel the air rushing past her, the pounding of her heart, the weight of the moment. She was not just chasing prey. She was chasing her place in this world. The deer tried to escape, but the pack was relentless. Elsa and the alpha took the lead, pushing the deer toward a narrow gap between two trees. It was a perfect trap, and Elsa knew it. The pack had honed this technique over years of hunting, and now she was part of it. The chase was exhilarating, but it was also a test, one that would determine how far Elsa had come, how much she had learned from the wolves. With one final, decisive move, Elsa leaped forward, her jaws snapping shut around the deer's leg. The deer cried out in fear, but Elsa's grip was firm, her instincts sharp. The pack closed in, and in seconds the deer was brought down. Elsa stood over the fallen prey, her chest heaving, her body trembling with the rush of the hunt. The pack gathered around, their eyes glowing with pride and satisfaction. Elsa stood tall, her head raised in triumph. She had done it. She had hunted with the pack, earned her place among them. The alpha stepped forward, his blue eyes locking onto Elsa's. There was a quiet, approving growl in his throat, and for the first time Elsa understood what that meant. She was one of them now, not just in body but in spirit. She had earned their respect, their trust. But Elsa's heart remained with her pups. As the wolves tore into the deer, Elsa glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. She would always protect them, always put them first. The pack had accepted her, but nothing mattered more than her pups. That night, as they returned to the cave, Elsa lay beside her pups, the warmth of the hunt still in her bones. The wind howled outside, but inside the cave they were safe. The pack was strong, and Elsa was part of it. But more than that, she had learned the true meaning of loyalty. Not just to the pack, but to her family, her pups, the ones she had vowed to protect. As Elsa closed her eyes that night, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had come from a place of chains, of fear, but now she had found freedom. She had found family, and she knew, deep in her heart, that as long as she had them, she could face anything the wild threw their way. This was her home now, and she would fight to keep it.